Welcome to the Can Innovate podcast, the first ever podcast designed to showcase Canadian thought leadership. These innovators share industry insights, entrepreneurial best practices, lessons learned, and other tips that we can incorporate right into our lives, our careers, and our businesses. So let's get inspired. This was an interesting episode because I get to sit down and talk to Ste Marie, and he is the founder of Depression to Expression. And he has been speaking openly about this experience with clinical depression and anxiety disorder since 2013. Now, what's really interesting is that he's got a huge community and he serves over 150,000 members, and he reaches over 10 million people around the world. Like, he's brilliant. So Scott and I sit down and chat about some of these topics that really aren't so easy to talk about or even ask questions. You know, sometimes I kind of feel like you can't ask questions about what does that mean? Like, I don't know what depression really means. And, you know, there's a lot of stigma when people don't understand and all those things. So we talk about everything from depression to being depressed to social anxiety, how these things are all on the rise. And he's really making this topic easy and kind of fun for people to understand. I mean, you should check out his Depression to Expression YouTube videos. They are colorful and down to earth. And honestly, it's just really nice to actually hear something that's such an honest dialogue, but a real dialogue between two friends. So I can't wait for you to hear your feedback on this episode, because this one was quite the eye-opener for me. Hey, innovators, I am really honored today. I got to talk to Ste Marie, who's the founder of Depression to Expression. And he has been speaking openly about his experience with clinical depression and anxiety disorder since 2013. More importantly, what I love about this guy is that he shares how he manages these illnesses successfully. So Depression to Expression started as an online mental health support community and is now serving over 150,000 members, reaching over 10 million people around the world. And offline, Scott actually provides amazing workshops, presentations to schools and businesses in Toronto and around the other areas. And he's really creating an open and honest dialogue about mental health. Scott, I am super excited to talk to you finally about this.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Thank you.
I am so happy that we accidentally ran into and met at a conference. And this just blows my mind when you told me what you're doing, because it's really one of those things where people just don't talk about it enough. And two, even if you aren't aware of what those things, you feel a little awkward to ask questions. And I was just so kind of baffled that you were just so open about so many different topics.
For sure. You know what? It's bringing people back. You know, the key word in our mission at Depression to Expression is honesty, right? But the way you get to be truly honest, like when you and I met at the conference, this is a perfect example of why people should go to conferences, because then you get this kind of hookup here. And it's bringing that honesty into the conversation of mental health and recognizing our humanity, right? It doesn't matter the title you have, CEO, account manager, doctor, lawyer, that doesn't matter. We want to break down these labels and just recognize our own humanity when it comes to mental health, because we all have this spectrum of emotions that we can all relate to if we have the conversation, right? We can all relate to having anxiety. The majority of us have been depressed, okay? It doesn't mean it's clinical depression where it lasts a really long time, but we've all felt and had times of depression. How do we open up that conversation? How do we have that dialogue with businesses, right? With schools, even starting from as low as grade 2 and grade 3, right? How do we recognize that these emotions are just part of being human, not necessarily mental illnesses? So there's a lot going on with mental health, right? And we know there's the Bell Let's Talk. We know there's all kinds of corporate initiatives, but there's a lot of miscommunication in that and mixed messaging where the conversation is revolving around mental illness, right? But we want to have a mental health conversation because we all have brains, we all have mental health, and you have people tweeting about this all the time. But a lot of us don't even know what mental health means. And you'd be surprised with the workshops I do. And you ask people, okay, well, what is mental health? You know, you tweeted on January 30th about Bell Let's Talk, but do you know what mental health means? And the answers you get are really, really interesting. But a lot of people, again, there's a lot of miscommunication, and depression to expression exists to have that expressive and honest dialogue about mental health.
Well, let's go back to this. So what is mental health? Because I'm not even sure I actually know.
And honestly, okay, you put let's talk about mental illness for a second. This is really interesting. You put like 1,000 doctors in a room, psychiatrists and psychologists, and the definition of mental illness is actually really, really difficult to define, because the way we diagnose people is through the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mood Disorders, right? The DSM-5. And I could talk to you and we could say, okay, this happen to have clinical depression, and then there's a list of all of these symptoms, right? And the duration of all of these symptoms. Okay, have you been sleeping more than usual? How's your appetite? Are you more isolated than ever before? Are you having thoughts of suicide and death, right? Where are you in accordance to your baseline mood? And depending on your life situation, maybe you actually are really depressed and you match all of those symptoms in the DSM-5, right? So you could actually have a mental illness if you go into your doctors and say, okay, I'm feeling all these things. What a doctor needs to do and what we need to do is define illnesses and mental health correctly. So, okay, say you're feeling depressed, Sapna. Well, the doctor needs to ask what the heck is going on in your life. Not just I'm feeling all of these symptoms, but hey, did a loved one pass away in the last few months? Okay, well, there's a reason for depression. It's not just a chemical imbalance, right? There are reasons for our moods. There are reasons why we feel certain ways a lot of the time. So when it comes to mental illness, that's extremely difficult to define because it can't just be a list of symptoms. You need to look into a person's personal history and find out, are there certain causes? And that goes into relationships, that can go into diet, that can go into lifestyle, exercise, genetics. So it's an extremely complicated problem just defining mental illness. So it's not as easy as people think. Now, mental health is basically the same way. You ask, okay, well, what the heck does mental health mean? And I really, really like this definition by the World Health Organization. And again, there's a whole bunch of definitions, but this one is basically your ability. Mental health is your ability to feel, think, and act. Those three beautiful words: feel, think, and act. We talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Those are the big three. So mental health, the ability to feel, think, and act in ways that help us enjoy life and to deal with the challenges we face. That is a beautiful definition, because someone can have mental health, and a person that has really great mental health is able to have tools and strategies and has built relationships and has a support system on when a challenge comes their way, when some difficult life circumstance presents itself. Well, they have the ability to deal with that challenge. Because we know people, when something hard comes their way, boom, they fall flat on the floor and they're not able to deal with these things, right? Having mental health is, yes, you're enjoying life, your thoughts are in order, your feelings are somewhat managed and controlled, and your behavior embodies these thoughts and feelings, right? So when you have all three of those in our cognitive behavioral triangle, which we can talk about, so that means when all those are in check and you're really well managed in that sense, well, now you're able to deal with life's tough curveballs that get thrown your way, right? Because everyone has, that's the part of the humanity part. Everyone has these complex emotions and these difficult circumstances that come their way. Having mental health is able to deal with those challenges. So it's not necessarily, okay, you have mental health. Well, that means, hey, you have great mental health. You're happy all the time, right? And you're feeling great all the time. And you're smiling all the time. And you're fit. And you're just enjoying life 100% of the time. No, mental health is still experiencing all of these emotions: sadness, anger, jealousy, even depression, feeling anxious. It's experiencing all these, but you're still able to enjoy life a little bit at a time, right? And also deal with those challenges.
So this is really interesting because for a couple of weeks ago, I was really kind of down in the dumps because weather was
terrible, that my book writing wasn't going as well as I was hoping it was going to be progressing, and there's a couple of other factors. So I was kind of a little blue. So you're saying that because I was able to kind of bounce back and, deal that I actually had good mental health because I actually had the foundations to experience ups and downs and go, okay, it's just a small setback. I can keep moving. So I don't get to, call myself depressed per se. I was kind of depressed for a moment there because I was just a little blue.
Exactly. Yeah. And you know what? You can say you're depressed. And that's the thing. Like being depressed isn't a mental illness. So it's not a taboo word. Feeling anxious doesn't mean you have an anxiety disorder, right? Depressed means there's just a lack of involvement in your relationships. And maybe you're feeling blue, more sad than normal. Maybe it lasts a little longer, but it's not clinical depression. So the weather gets me depressed sometimes. It gets a lot of people depressed sometimes. So what's interesting when I talked about, having that diagnosis and how it's hard to define mental illness. Well, let's say when it's cloudy, like a few days ago for you or yesterday, you went to the doctors and they didn't ask you a lot of whys. I bet you could tick off a lot of those symptoms for clinical depression because you were in that state of depression because of the weather, because of how you're feeling in that moment. So the diagnosis for mental illness is really, really interesting, but has to be a full life story. And that's what, in Ontario, people go to their family doctors for these diagnoses. And at family doctor, you see someone for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, where the wait for a psychiatrist is so backed up that people have no choice but to see their family doctor, and they get a diagnosis. And we know that antidepressants and these mental illness diagnoses are people are way over-diagnosed, and antidepressants are way over-prescribed. So many people need them, and it helps them so much. But that's why defining what clinical depression means, what mental health means, what mental illness means, that's why it's so, so important for people to know this too, and not to just wait until they see their family doctor or experience these emotions to then do the research and find out the hard way. It's having that education in the workplace and with employers and employees and students and staff and teachers and parents. Get that education early. So that's what Depression to Expression is all about. One is, let's have a fun way to define these things, and let's actually have a dialogue and be honest about it. And then the next part is, okay, now we've defined the terms. Now let's talk about how we can maintain our positive sense of mental health. How can we deal with those challenges successfully? That's the part. So we have that definition of how we feel, think, and act that enhance our ability to enjoy life and deal with the challenges we face. Okay, well, let's check out some tools that actually help us deal with those challenges. And we all need those tools no matter what age.
Yeah, no, this is brilliant, because one of the things I really loved about our initial conversation, Scott, was, I had no idea, and I'm kind of actually surprised that I had no idea, because now that you've brought it to my awareness, I didn't realize there was a difference between anxiety and anxiety disorders. And you kind of really blew my mind when, you kind of differentiated it for me, because I actually didn't correlate that there were actually two types of different things that are happening.
No, absolutely. And that's again, a common misconception. Again, you look at the definition of anxiety, it's something like feelings of nervousness and fear of an unknown outcome. That's kind of what anxiety means. Fear of an unknown outcome. And then I joke because, everyone experiences anxiety because, life, it has an uncertain outcome. Or sorry, every day, everything you do has some kind of an uncertain outcome. Sorry, you don't know really what's going to happen. Life's pretty unpredictable. The only thing we know for certain in life is death. That's the only thing. So of course, we have this fear of uncertainty, and we have this feeling of nervousness in life, and that's all anxiety is. We all feel anxious. Now, it becomes an anxiety disorder when it lasts. Now, in that DSM-5 that I talked about, it says, well, these symptoms of anxiety, this feeling of nervousness for maybe no apparent reason, will last 6 months or more. And if you say, okay, it's lasted 6 months, I don't know why I'm anxious all the time, my appetite's down, I'm not doing things I used to, it's really, really affecting my life in a negative way. Well, then we can talk about that word disorder, when it's really affecting your relationships and your ability to function. That's the big part. So anxiety, normal. You have a presentation, you're feeling nervous, anxious, normal, right? You're getting married and you're getting cold feet, anxious, normal. But when you talk about, okay, I'm just waking up in the morning and I'm anxious, I have no idea why, and it's lasted like 6 months or more, and it's affecting my relationships, then we talk about, disorders.
No, this is so great, because I really had zero clue that there was such a distinction and to it. And it makes a big difference of how you see it. Like, being anxious about things is actually a kind of a good nervous energy, and it can be a really positive thing. But then we hear so many of these terminology in the industry, and they put such taboos that I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm anxious, therefore I think there's something wrong, right? And
totally. So the funny thing is, like, anxiety, you're absolutely right. It served us so well for thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. That's why we're here today. That fear response, right? So anxiety was very useful because humans are great at looking for problems. We look for problems all the time. That's why we're here. When we were a tribal species and there was bears around, we're like, okay, everyone, there's a bear, watch out, be scared, or else we're all gonna die. Like, seriously. So we still have that fear response in us, in our biology, but anxiety isn't very useful anymore. Okay, we don't have a bear across the street in Toronto, at least I hope not. So that anxiety we feel is still within our biology, but we need to do a better job controlling it now. It's not as useful. It's brought us here today, but we live in a fairly safe city now. And as Torontonians, we don't necessarily need that fear response as much. So we need to understand why anxiety is there, why it served us so well, but now how can we control it? How can we manage it? And what does it mean when you have anxiety? What does it mean? It means it's, as I said, you're doing a presentation or you're nervous or anxious. Just say to yourself, hey, this is a normal response. Everyone gets anxious. Bring it back to humanity. Bring it back to us as a species. We have that fear response for a reason sometimes. And, just noticing that helps a lot with managing those symptoms.
Love it. And speaking of what does it mean, what does depression to expression really mean?
Oh, what a question. Great question. So, so we talked about depression as not being necessarily a mental illness. You talk about major depressive disorder, aka clinical depression. That's a disorder right there. Okay. But depression in itself, for me, the name depression to expression, depression is a state of being closed off, a state of being isolated, a state of lack of expression. Literally, the opposite of expression is depression. You're closed off to the world, right? Shoulders are turned inward, head is down. You just think of someone who's depressed. What does their body look like, right? Your head's down, eyes sensitive to light, shoulders turned, back is hunched down, walking slowly. Okay, that's a state of depression. And the name depression to expression means, okay, how can we get people from that state, not clinical depression really, but a state of non-expression, a state of isolation, a state of fear, a state of maybe shyness. And how do we move them from a state of depression to expression, where expression means letting your feelings and thoughts be known, which is a really cool definition, letting your feelings and thoughts be known to yourself and to the world, right? So how do we get people to express themselves? How do we get people to talk about how maybe they do have an anxiety disorder? Maybe they're feeling nervous for no reason all the time. Maybe they're having a difficult time in their relationship. Maybe they're having financial trouble. It doesn't matter what it is. How can we get people to express themselves? How can we get people to have that dialogue, not only internal dialogue with themselves and have that cyclical thinking and almost drive themselves a little quote unquote crazy, but how do we get them to a state of expression where they're comfortable sharing their feelings and emotions, where you're comfortable talking to an employer about how you're feeling, where the employer is comfortable talking to employees about mental health? That's what depression to expression is all about. We need to be open with each other. And it doesn't matter. Again, it goes back to that sense of humanity. We can't have this hierarchy in the workplace when it comes to having these conversations. Hierarchy is important in the workplace because, hey, you have a boss and you have all these different roles. But when it comes to helping people with their emotional state, we need to be expressive in that sense. We need to be able to share these things. And that gets people, when you open up that conversation, people are more productive, people are more creative, people are more involved in their job, people are more involved in school, teachers are more involved, our relationships just blossom. So expression is having that honest dialogue with people, moving from that state of closed offness, of being closed off to the world and to others, and to welcome the world, welcome the spectrum of emotion, welcome fear, welcome that anxiety and nervousness with open arms, welcome challenge with open arms, right? That's what expression represents. That's what depression to expression is all about.
I know, it's amazing. I think it's really, really fantastic. And I actually got a chance to check out a couple of YouTube videos, which are, how do I say it? Very spirited. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. Like, it is so out there. Everything else you see in the media is so polished and PC correct. And you're just out there. Like, it's just honest dialogue. Like, it's very not politically correct at all. I think that's an even better way of saying that. Like, why did you decide to take that direction when you talk to people? It's really fantastic.
In my experience talking when it comes to mental health, okay, when we're talking about something this is the difficult part about mental health too. Mental health is a big deal. It is a big deal because when you speak about mental health, you think about suicide and people taking their own life. That's a big deal. But at the same time, mental health isn't a big deal at all, as in it shouldn't be a big deal to talk about, right? Just like physical health. So we need to have the conversation that mental health is a big deal, but at the same time, it's not a big deal. And the best way I found to do that is there's no room for political correctness when talking about mental health and something as serious as suicide. You need to take all different kinds of approaches when you have a subject like this. So on the YouTube channel, drop a couple F-bombs. Why not, right? You're dealing with a young audience, having modern day references to describe mental health differently and depression, and having experience of my own life, right? And having different people on the channel from all over the world to discuss, that humanity part. Doesn't matter where you live, doesn't matter what your age. Look at this person from Australia. Look at this person from Poland that came on the channel. Look at this person from the US. We all have mental health, and YouTube was the best way to kind of share that experience with the world, right? It's the second biggest search engine in the world. People are searching for help with depression and anxiety and their mental health. And that was like the best medium. So it's growing a lot faster now than it was. I uploaded the first video in 2013, and throughout my full-time jobs and everything, I would still come home, after work at 9-8 o'clock, and then upload a video, and then, go back to my full-time job. And I loved it so much. That's how you can tell I really liked it, because I was willing to do work after work. But YouTube was the best medium. So now, I should have given you an updated bio. There's now over 200,000 subscribers there, and growing fast. People like this dialogue of mental health, and it made so much sense for just me to be open. Just say what you're feeling. And that brings people, to the channel, and allows people to resonate with the content. And you said free spirited. Yeah, I guess it's very not politically correct at all. But people do enjoy it. People are drawn to YouTubers who are just honest with the camera, honest with their audience. And that's what I like to do.
No, and I love it because it was actually very relatable. It's like talking to a buddy. Like, it really was like, it really felt comfortable. It wasn't that you put it awkward or anything else. Like, the energy, the spirit, the topics itself is very relatable. And it just felt like, talking to a friend. Awesome. So it really, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you.
So I have another question I've been dying to ask you. You kind of mentioned earlier on about, going to schools and different things, and as early as ages of 2 to 3 year olds or grade 2 to 3. Are you seeing a lot when it comes to the demographics and ages? What do you see mostly happening that's affecting the population? Because I was kind of surprised to hear grade 2 and 3.
Yeah, so with grade 2s and 3s, it's, again, even for all elementary school and even high school, again, the conversation doesn't revolve around mental illness, because you tell elementary school kids, they love using that word anxiety. They're like, oh, my anxiety is so bad today. They use that word my too, like they own it, like it's theirs, which is another discussion. But my anxiety is so bad. Okay, well, let's talk about what that means. Let's not talk about, okay, so everyone, this is what clinical depression is. I have it. This is what generalized anxiety disorder is. I have it. Check off these 7 symptoms and you have it too. Da, 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 da. No, it's nothing like that. It's the presentations are just helping kids be aware of their emotional state. And just not, it's almost a mindful approach to mental health when you get to the early age. And a big thing with that is social media, and basically just phone use and internet use for kids. It's asking them, okay, so let's be aware and let's be mindful of how you feel after or before you go online, and then when you get offline. How do you feel when you're scrolling through your feeds? How do you feel before? How do you feel after? Let's compare, right? Because you can't just say to kids, hey, social media is bad. Look at all these cool studies. They're not gonna fall for it. Okay. We say cigarettes are bad. People are still smoking 50 years later. So social media, the data's not quite there yet, but the testimony can be there. The personal experience can be there. So you help these kids be aware of their emotions by saying, how do you feel before? How do you feel after you use social media? That's just one example of the presentations for younger kids. So it's not necessarily, saying, hey, this is what mental illness means. It's not going over the definitions in so much detail. It's also using props to describe emotional regulation. It's also doing a mindfulness session with kids, right, to bring them back to the bodies. So I use a Tibetan sound bowl and have like a relaxation moment with kids. Because the truth is, kids are consuming way more information than they ever have before. Clearly, just with internet access, and then going to school and then consuming more information. But we need to teach kids how to be mindful, how to basically decipher these different kinds of emotions. And it's not basically saying, okay, again, this is what anxiety is. This is the label you might have. This is the diagnosis. Like, that's way too complicated and kids can't digest that. Just having a fun conversation of emotion and what it means, again, and why they're there.
No, it's really interesting because I was doing some research and do some reading, and we talked about how if you're kind of withdrawing yourself from people and understanding what that means, because it could be something else that's with clinical depression or something else that's there. And I was actually doing some reading about how loneliness, and I know you and I've talked about this before, about how loneliness is a growing epidemic that's happening across multiple different ages. And it was really interesting because I was watching the news last week, and they've actually, I don't know if you heard about this, they actually in some schools have created a friendship bench. So if kids are feeling lonely and they have no one to play with, that they can sit on this bench and people would see someone sitting there and they would go and talk to them and invite them to play and so on. And I thought, wow, what an interesting approach. Like, loneliness does happen in all ages. And I'm wondering if there's a correlation that's with the growing epidemic and people feeling depressed and feeling blue and all that stuff. If they're, is this something that's growing? What's your point of view?
I've never heard that idea. That's actually pretty cool. The friendship bench.
Mm-hmm. I'll send you the link. I literally just saw it on the news like last week.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Because lots of kids are having a hard time connecting with people. Parents are so busy, so they interact with their own social circles, and they have their own friends, and they have the kids are the friends, and that's how they make friends. It's not like it was, but way in the day, like when I was growing up, where I could knock on someone's door and say, "Hey, Jimmy, you want to come out and play?" Like, it's not as easy to kind of just roam around the neighborhood.
Yeah,
see who can play, right? So, how do you make friends when they haven't, learned how to do that?
Well, exactly. And I think it was global. There was some study, I don't want to misrepresent the statistics, but it was that teen drinking and smoking has actually decreased since probably we were kids, since the early 2000s, because kids just aren't going to parties anymore in high school. And I'm sure it was different for you and me. Like there was parties every weekend. That's what you did to be social. But now it's more online gaming and going within the house and playing those video games and just talking on social rather than getting together, riding bikes, just going to parties on the weekend. So that's really interesting how that's decreased, and that probably accounts more for the loneliness. But something else that was really interesting is when we talk about helicopter parenting, where there's parents that are really overprotective of their children, and you see this in when kids are really young. It's called the lack of free play. So what teachers and parents are encouraged to do now is let your kids, stay far back in the playground at home, and if the daughter has a brother, or there's brother, sister, brother, let them play on their own. Let them resolve their differences. Let them tussle. It's free play. Let them do this, because that's how they discover the world. That's how they discover their social circle. That's how they learn from others and learn about themselves. It's not by getting into a tussle and argument and then a parent immediately intervenes and says, stop. They need to figure these things out for themselves at a very young age. That's how they become social. That's how they socialize. And when you have helicopter parents intervening every single time there's something going on, or some different, some argument or some disagreement between kids, well, how are they going to learn how to communicate with their friends and develop relationships? And it starts at such an early age. So what's happening is that overprotection of children is, I think, affecting them early on. And there's a few studies about this, and it's really, really interesting.
It's just really fascinating to me about all these different things. Like, out of curiosity, why do you think there is such a rise in mental health, mental illness and mental health problems, not just in Canada, but globally?
So the one could be that free play. It could be that because people are more isolated. People are more socially anxious. Social anxiety is absolutely massive. And it's funny because those are my most popular videos on YouTube. People are searching for, how do I get rid of social anxiety, deal with social anxiety? These are what people are searching from all over the world. That's a big thing. And it starts as kids with letting them involve themselves in debate, in disagreement, in tussle. It's not let boys be boys and let them wrestle, but to a degree, yes, let them find their place in the world at an early age. The other part is, so again, remember, it's not easy to define what mental illness is. And a lot of people don't know what mental health means. So in Canada, you see this 1 in 5 statistic all the time. 1 in 5 people have a mental illness or mental health problem in any given year. Well, it's such a misleading statistic because the mental illness definition is there, but also mental health problem. 1 in 5 people deal with a mental health problem in any given year. And they get these statistics from people who call into public service centers and publicly funded organizations. So you have like Kids Help Phone and things like that. So and then from public data from people being diagnosed, right? But the definition of mental health problem is literally just challenges people go through, and mental health challenges and psychological challenges people go through in any given year, and they usually get over them. So if you went through a breakup and you were down in the dumps for like 3 months, you could say that was a mental health problem. And then that's put into the 1 in 5. So it's really complicated, and I think it's very misleading to say that mental illness is on the rise, because there's difficulty defining mental illness. People are being diagnosed, not necessarily for the right reasons. When you go to a family doctor and they don't know your life history, so you're getting this label, then you're put into that 1 in 5. The mental health problem definition is very broad, and me and you could easily have mental health problems. You have a mental health problem already, Sapna, because yesterday you were down in the dumps because it was cloudy outside. This could be defined as a mental health problem. So you see things on the rise because these definitions are really broad and you can be put into these categories so easily. So again, the Bell Let's Talk, I know it's somewhat of a corporate stunt, but the 1 in 5 is a really, really misleading statistic. Even saying mental illness is on the rise is pretty misleading because that depends on how you define mental illness, right? So it's actually way more complicated than we think. And the data is not just there. And if the data is there, again, it depends on the definitions.
This is so good. This is such a kind of eye-opener for me. And I'm sure for our listeners as well. Scott, I would love to get your advice about, is there any tips that you can offer or tools that what we can do to kind of improve or keep exercising our mental health?
Ooh, there's a lot. So on my YouTube channel, there's like over 700 videos, and every video is basically something else you can do, a new way to think about anxiety, a new way to relate to your emotions, some new exercise, some new cognitive exercise you can do, a new meditation, a new physical exercises. So there's so much you can do, and what works for some people doesn't work for others. And we see that with diet. We see that with therapies. CBT works for some, and then acceptance and commitment therapy works for others. And then a mindfulness approach works for other people. And then just going to the gym works for other people and snaps them out of a low state. So there are a lot of things we can do. But the one thing I would really recommend, and what helped me tremendously, especially with anxiety, is meditation. Now, there's like so many misconceptions with what meditation is. You don't need to go in the middle of the woods and sit on a rock and say, you don't need to put your index finger to your thumb and put those on your knees. It's not like that at all. I would encourage people, what mindfulness really means is mindfulness is noticing what's happening right now. Pretty cool definition. Mindfulness is noticing what's happening right now. And when you notice what's happening in your body, when you notice what's happening in the physical world, okay, what am I tasting? What am I smelling? What am I feeling? What am I hearing? What do my feet feel like on the floor, right? Is there any pain? What does my lower back feel like? What's the temperature against my skin? When you bring attention to all these things, well, guess what's happening? That cyclical thinking that you had, those anxious thoughts that you were having, tend to disappear because you're bringing that attention into the physical world. You're noticing what's happening right now. That's why when in yoga and meditation, you work on the breath, because the breath brings you into that present moment, takes you away from living up in the clouds, living in your mind all the time. So meditation brings you to a state of being in the present. Now, people usually say, well, I can't sit still for that long. Well, try 20 seconds. Try 10 seconds to begin. Sit 10 seconds, just 2 deep breaths. You're done for the day, right? Small steps. And what you'll notice is there's an awesome scientist called Andrew Newberg. And he did all these MRI scans for people who do not meditate and those who have years of meditation experience. And what he found out was people who meditated a lot have these, you hook up all these electrodes, and the part of the brain that was most active in the prefrontal cortex had the prefrontal cortex, I forget what it was, the specific area. But the prefrontal cortex has a lot to do with our ability to feel space and to know our awareness and to know our place, like physically. And that is really, really lit up in people who meditate. So you have that feeling of the present moment, right? Where you're not in your head thinking about, what's happening? What happened yesterday? I regret what I did. I should have done this. I could have done this. Okay, tomorrow I'm planning for this. Thinking is really important, but a lot of the time it just gets in our way. So meditation really, for me, brought me to a place of feeling content, still planning for the future, still learning from the past. But when that's said and done, how can we enjoy the moment? How can we just look out our windows and breathe? How can we just sit at our desks and breathe for a minute, right? So you start small and work your way up to, hey, it can be 10 minutes a day, it can be 5 minutes a day, it can be a half hour a day, right? Everyone's different. So meditation is really, really key. The other thing, 5 times, the other thing I would really recommend is journaling. So hey, call it a diary, call it a journal. Every morning when you wake up, 3 things that you're looking forward to today. When you go to bed, 3 things you're grateful for. A really easy way to have purpose and say, okay, like even the smallest things. When you do this every day, okay, 3 things you're looking forward to during the day. Okay, well, if you've been doing this for 30 days, oh my gosh, you're going to run out of things. So you get to have this new definition of what amazing means or what you're looking forward to. So what I found is, okay, you're looking forward to the big things when you first start this, okay, and signing on this new client or going on this trip. And then what happens when you do this every day is, again, you redefine what amazing is. You redefine simplicity in your life. There's beauty in simplicity. So now what I look forward to, still there's the big things in the morning, but sometimes it's just first sip of coffee in the morning, right? Warm shower, brushing my teeth, walking to work because the sun's out this morning. So you redefine your days and you appreciate the simple things when you do this every day. And we know how much how gratitude affects our mental health and how we have this newfound appreciation for our days and the simple things. So that's in the morning, what you're looking forward to. And then at night, what were you grateful for during the day? What made your day? Was it what you put down in the morning, what you were looking forward to, or what other amazing things happened during the day? I met someone new, right? I finished this thing I had to do at work. I had lunch with my coworkers. I tried out a new restaurant. I benched 15 pounds extra, some small things that you're grateful for. And again, when you do this every day, there's that newfound appreciation for the daily life and the daily things that we experience.
That's awesome. And honestly, I am very grateful that we got to chat because I was looking forward to it for such a long time and it did not disappoint. It totally did not disappoint. So this is really brilliant, Scott. Like seriously, I'm going to put all your YouTube links and everything into the show notes for all of our listeners because there's just so much value that you provide and you really have. The videos are really fun. Like honestly, they just make you take out the fear of talking about things and I really enjoyed that.
Well, thanks so much. Yeah, it's a fun thing to talk about. Like really, again, mental health is a big deal, but at the same time, let's not make it a big deal. Let's have some fun. Let's recognize our humanity. Let's put aside our differences and look at what makes us similar. And that's that we all experience these emotions, that we all have gone through tough times, that we can all relate to each other in one way or another. I always think, like, how can people be in such disagreement and hate each other when deep down maybe they both like a nice piece of chocolate cake? You know, how does that happen? Let's look at the similarities. So, hey, thank you so much for having me on. I really, really appreciate it. This has been so much fun.
Thanks, everyone, for joining in and tuning in this week. Next week, you got another really cool episode. Hope you enjoyed the sneak peek. I'm going to try to do this and see how this works. If you guys are interested, like the little sneak teasers, let me know. I'd love to hear back from all of you. And don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review. And let me know if you know of another Canadian innovator that's doing something really cool around the world. Let's get them showcased. Or if there's an innovation trend that you would like to specifically focus on. Anyways, looking forward to hearing from all of you and talk to you next week. Cheers.